Empire of the Streets. Chapter 1. The Rise of the King. Introduction. In the 1970s, New York was a city where crime and power walked hand in hand. The grimy streets of Manhattan, shrouded in smog and darkness, concealed a boiling pot of ambition and greed. It was in this chaos and shadow that the story of Michael Kingston began, a man determined to take everything into his own hands and rewrite the rules of the game. Section 1. The beginning of the journey. Michael was a man who understood that in this city, no one would give him what he wanted unless he took it himself. His journey to the top began with a meeting in a small Italian restaurant on the outskirts of Brooklyn. It was here that he met Johnny Marino, an old Italian mobster who controlled a significant portion of the drug trade in the area. Section 2. Expanding influence. Michael knew that to achieve his goals, he had to be smarter than everyone else. He didn't just take over territories, he built a network of alliances, controlling not only the drug trade but also gambling dens, underground clubs, and prostitution. Section 3. The transition to legitimate business. But Michael wasn't just a gangster, he wanted more. He saw a future where his power would be recognized not only on the streets but also in high society. To do this, he began using the money earned from blood and drugs to legitimize his business. Conclusion of chapter. By the end of the first chapter, Michael had already controlled a significant portion of New York's criminal world. But he knew this was only the beginning, and ahead of him lay many trials and enemies who wouldn't stop until they saw his downfall. Chapter 2. Family Ties. Introduction. As Michael Kingston's influence grew, his personal life began to suffer. The time he once spent with his family was now filled with meetings with allies, decisions about new territory takeovers, and eliminating competitors. But as hard as he tried to hide the dark side of his life, it still seeped into his home. Section 1. Hidden cracks. Jessica Kingston, Michael's wife, was a woman who knew her husband wasn't entirely who he appeared to be. She saw the changes in his demeanor when he returned home after night meetings, the growing amounts of money, and the fact that Michael was spending more time away from his family. Section 2. Visits from the past. The past always catches up with you, especially when you try to run from it. For Michael, this became a reality when an unexpected visitor arrived at his doorstep, his younger brother, James. Section 3. Avoiding the truth. Jessica began noticing the growing tension in the house. Michael became even more withdrawn, and his conversations with James turned into short, tense encounters. She realized her world was beginning to fall apart, and she couldn't stop it. Conclusion of chapter. In the second chapter, Michael faces internal problems within his family that begin to threaten his criminal empire. His brother James becomes a source of new danger, and Jessica starts her own investigation, which could destroy everything Michael has built. Chapter 3. The War for Territory. Introduction. While Michael Kingston's personal problems were escalating, his criminal empire was facing new threats. In a world where every inch of land could be a source of enormous revenue, the fight for control never ceased. Michael, accustomed to having his orders obeyed without question, faced new, more aggressive opponents who were ready to go to any lengths to bring him down. Section 1. A new enemy. A new player had emerged in New York, Terry Johnson, an ambitious young gangster who wasn't afraid to take what he thought was deserved. His methods were quick and brutal, and he didn't hesitate to take down those who stood in his way. Section 2. The First Blood. Terry didn't stop at small skirmishes. He knew that to overthrow the king, he needed to deliver a crushing blow. He chose his moment when Michael was most vulnerable, at night when his people least expected an attack. Section 3. Michael understood that to save his empire, he would have to resort to extreme measures. He gathered all his closest allies and launched a series of swift and precise strikes against Terry's positions, eliminating his closest associates and demonstrating that Michael hadn't lost his grip. Conclusion of chapter. The third chapter ends with Michael winning the first battle, but he realizes that the war is far from over. Terrence Johnson remains a serious threat despite his losses, and his desire to overthrow Michael has now become a personal vendetta. Michael and his people face new challenges that will test their loyalty and resolve. Chapter 4. The Cover-Up. Introduction. With every new step toward the top, Michael Kingston understood that the war for power wasn't just about blood and guns. The real game was played in the shadows, where decisions were made behind closed doors, and the faces that smiled at him during the day could become his enemies at night. To maintain his empire and protect his family, Michael needed to create a solid cover, a network of legitimate businesses that would not only generate profit but also divert attention from his true activities. Section 1. Building the legal facade. Michael began investing heavily in legitimate businesses. He opened several new nightclubs, invested in real estate, and started the construction of a large shopping center in Brooklyn. Each of these projects was part of his plan to create a legal image that would distract the police and competitors from his real business. Section 2. A new ally. To implement his plans, Michael needed a partner who understood how legal businesses worked and had connections in high circles. That partner was Richard Huntington, a successful businessman with an impeccable reputation, who also had his own skeletons in the closet. Section 3. Police surveillance. Meanwhile, Detective Marcus Howard wasn't giving up. He knew Michael was involved in criminal activities, but the evidence was scarce. Howard realized that the only way to catch Michael was to uncover his cover and prove the connection between the legitimate business and the criminal empire. Conclusion of chapter. By the end of the 4th chapter, Michael had created an impressive legal cover that temporarily protected him from prosecution. However, Detective Howard wasn't giving up and continued searching for mistakes that could reveal Michael's true face. The alliance with Richard Huntington brought new opportunities but also made Michael vulnerable to a man he couldn't fully trust. The war continued, and the stakes grew higher. The Web of Betrayal. Introduction. In Michael Kingston's world, trust was always a scarce resource. Every decision, every step could lead to disaster if someone close to him decided to switch sides. Michael knew that betrayal could come from the most unexpected places and that to keep his empire intact, he had to stay constantly vigilant. But when betrayals began to surface one by one, even he wasn't prepared for what was to come. Section 1. Internal doubts. With each passing day, the tension between Michael and his closest associates grew. Raymond Ray Thompson, who had been with Michael from the beginning, started to doubt his friend's methods. Michael became increasingly paranoid, suspecting everyone around him. Meetings with Richard Huntington became more secretive, and Ray felt he was being pushed out of important decisions. Section 2. The enemy within. Meanwhile, Terry Johnson wasted no time. He knew that the only way to defeat Michael was to destroy his empire from within. Terry began contacting people within Michael's circle, offering them money and protection in exchange for information and betrayal. Section 3. The unveiling. Jessica, meanwhile, continued her investigation. She knew her husband was hiding something significant, and her meetings with Detective Jack Ryan became more frequent. She provided him with information about Michael's new deals and his meetings with Richard Huntington. Jack began to see the picture forming into a dangerous game for Michael. Conclusion of chapter. The 5th chapter ends at a critical moment. Michael faces the threat of betrayal from within his organization as well as the potential collapse of his marriage. Terrence Johnson is gradually dismantling his empire, exploiting the weak links in Michael's circle. Jessica confronts Michael with an ultimatum, and the decision he makes will determine whether he can hold onto everything he's built or lose it all. Chapter 6. The Price of Power. Introduction. Power isn't just the ability to control others. It's a burden that becomes unbearable over time. Michael Kingston built an empire on fear, loyalty, and brutality, but now, as he faces betrayal and internal conflict, he begins to realize that the price for all of it might be too high. In this chapter, Michael faces the most difficult decisions of his life and learns just how thin the line is between success and downfall. Section 1. The Loss of Trust. After the frank conversation with Jessica, Michael realized that his family life was on the verge of collapse. He was willing to make any sacrifices to maintain his empire, but now he had to decide what was more important, power or family. Section 2. While Michael was trying to keep his family together, Terry Johnson continued his assault on his empire. With the help of Victor Felton and other traders within the organization, Terry began executing a plan to destroy Michael. He organized a series of attacks on key assets owned by Michael, aiming to weaken his position and force him into submission. Section 3. A bloody lesson. Michael decided to act quickly and ruthlessly. He arranged a meeting with Victor, suspecting him of leaking information. The meeting took place in a warehouse, far from prying eyes. Michael came with his security, but he decided to start the conversation one-on-one. Conclusion of chapter. The 6th chapter concludes another phase of Michael's struggle for power. He managed to temporarily hold onto his empire but lost another piece of his soul by sacrificing people and trusted allies. His relationship with Jessica is on the edge, and now she knows the whole truth. Terry continues his assault, and Michael understands that the price for his power is getting higher, but he's not ready to stop, even if it means losing everything he holds dear. Chapter 7. The Fall of the Empire. Introduction. The war for power had reached its climax. Michael Kingston, the man who had ruled New York streets with an iron grip, now found himself at the center of the storm he had created. Betrayals, losses, and relentless blows of fate had pushed his empire to the brink of collapse. In this chapter, Michael will face the ultimate test, understanding that it's impossible to hold on to everything and deciding what matters most, keeping his power at any cost or saving his soul. Section 1. The Last Stand. Michael knew his time was running out. Terry Johnson acted with incredible brutality and determination, methodically dismantling everything Michael had built over the years. Michael's groups gradually gave up the fight, seeing Terry as the new leader who could ensure their safety and income. Section 2. A Meeting with Fate. The battle began on a grim, rainy night. Terry and his men attacked the warehouse as planned. Michael knew his chances were slim, but he was ready to die defending what he believed was his. The gunfight began in the first minutes, and soon the streets were filled with the sounds of gunfire and screams. Section 3. The End of the Road. After taking the warehouse, Terry offered Michael a deal, his life in exchange for complete withdrawal from power and a life of obscurity. It was an offer that seemed unbelievable for a man who had spent his life fighting for every inch of land, for every drop of blood. Conclusion of chapter. The 7th chapter concludes Michael Kingston's downfall. He lost his empire but managed to save what mattered most, his life and the chance to start over with his family. The war for power was over, and although Michael lost the battle, he emerged alive, ready to begin a new life away from the criminal world. A new life. Several years had passed since Michael Kingston left New York's criminal world. He now lived on a small ranch in California, far from the noise and grime of the big city. With him were Jessica and their 2 children, who no longer knew the fear of nighttime gunshots and the constant expectation of danger. Michael had traded his sharp business suit for simple work clothes and spent most of his days tending cattle and working the fields. These simple but honest labors reminded him of what he had lost and what he had gained. Every day on the ranch was a step toward redemption, a new life he was building brick by brick. Jessica noticed how her husband had changed. The hard look that once filled his eyes with suspicion and fatigue was gone. Now he looked at the world with new hope, but with the same quiet dignity that had always been a part of him. "We did it, Michael," Jessica said one day as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset. "We left it all behind." "Yes," he replied quietly, squeezing her hand. "But the path was long. I'm glad you were with me." He knew there would always be a scar on his soul, that the past wouldn't be forgotten so easily. But he also knew he had a chance to start over, a chance to correct his mistakes and create a world for his family that he had once destroyed. Sometimes at night, Michael would wake up from nightmares, the sounds of gunfire, the faces of those he had lost. But now Jessica was always by his side, calming him down and reminding him that it was all in the past. Michael was no longer the king of the streets. He was just a man trying to live on. His children grew up in love and safety, far from the shadows that once haunted their father. And although he knew he could never fully escape his past, he was grateful for every new day, for every new opportunity life had given him. On one of those quiet days, as the sun set behind the horizon, Michael looked at his children playing in the yard and realized that his greatest achievement wasn't power, money, or the fear he instilled in others. His real achievement was the family he had saved and for whom he had found the strength to leave. His empire may have fallen, but he rose from the ashes to begin a new life. And that was a victory no one could take from him. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel and don't forget to hit the like button. Thank you for your attention.